Many workers die because of their workplace conditions, and yet their deaths are rarely on the news. When I ask why, the most common response is, though sad, there are more important things in the grand scheme of things. This answer leaves me wanting, for I regularly see news stations conflating celebrity gossip and cupcake recipes for news. Surely, concerns regarding employee safety are an important part of society and warrant at least equal such attention. Before you get too suspicious of the intentions of the news, let me remind you that almost every year the internet brings us similar such news, produced by influencers of various calibers decrying the faux pas of culturally insensitive costumes. These costumes frequently land the wearer in hot water for violating contemporary societal values. For YouTube's sake, with the help of these pictures, I assume that you already understand which costumes I am referring to that are so reviled this time of year. If one attends a Halloween party, one readily may witness patrons garbed as serial killers, renowned warriors, historical figures, monsters, and other frightening things. Why is it acceptable to dress as a serial killer or ancient warlord, but not to dress as a member of a group responsible for ethnic genocide? At first, the answer may be, there is a big difference between a serial killer and someone who kills millions of people. Surely, but there is also a difference between the mathematician or a Rubik's Cube and a serial killer who has killed tens of people. If the reason a genocidal dictator is considered evil is because of the number of deaths committed, then likewise, dressing as a serial killer should be significantly more offensive than dressing as a famous architect. Now, the next most common reason given is, there is a big difference between killing people and doing it for ethnic reasons, religious reasons, or any others. Are you convinced by this argument? Is wantonly harming people for fun somehow more acceptable than harming people for specific ethnic grievances? Have we reached this consensus? I dare say the media at large, who censors horses being shot in spaghetti westerns, yet glorifies the gory details of violent scenes, would support this notion. Have you consciously thought about this claim and found it agreeable? Or did the mainstream narrative find this guest lacking an invitation? Since it's Halloween, let's set aside these worries and accept the following claims. A costume is offensive if it 1. Lampoons or damages an ethnic minority or any minority group. And 2. It encourages behavior that disregards consent, such as violence or a four-letter word that rhymes with grape. Now, let's examine some popular stock Halloween costume. 1. Frankenstein's monster. Mary Godwin and Percy Shelley's book Frankenstein's Monster originally detailed Dr. Frankenstein's violation of nature in his quest to know the unknowable. Frankenstein's monster hinted at the fears of British society, referencing the colonization of South America, when Frankenstein's monster beseeches Dr. Frankenstein to build for him a wife, so he may go into the wilds of South America and live peacefully. Dr. Frankenstein, fearing that Frankenstein's monster may build a race of monsters, does not do so. The fact that the monster's skin, often depicted as green, was actually originally yellow, also implies a contemporary reference to the many races indentured and enslaved, that, in this instant, might copulate should Frankenstein's monster have a wife, and produce a resentful race. Indeed, the monster of Frankenstein is a frank metaphor for the races trampled by the British Empire. In quotations, I read, "You will return and again seek their kindness, and you will be met with their detestation. Your evil passions will be renewed, and you will then have a companion to aid you in the task of destruction." Frankenstein's monster is horrified by the beauty of British society, a society he is a product of, a captor in, but cannot be a part of. He can never be beautiful, never be human, and this constant grief, anxiety, and inner turmoil manifests itself in a constant cruelness in order to remind Victor Frankenstein of how he has violated nature and knowledge itself in order to create his existence, and to incessantly warn Victor Frankenstein of his threats long ago. Frankenstein's nameless monster promises Victor that he will be with him on his wedding night, with his cousin Elizabeth Lorenza, who he is marrying and who Victor has raised from his childhood. Victor takes this as a threat on his life, but finds out that his monster has killed his wife, and it is implied that the monster has done what he could not, referring to consecrating the marriage before killing her. This story of Frankenstein is a bone-chilling tale, but Frankenstein's monster is almost always portrayed as a cute and funny stereotypical monster. This monster has deep racial and ethical implications. 2. Witches. Aside from the obvious caricaturing of pagan faiths, the depiction of a witch bears a striking similarity to a number of other racial epithets towards Jews. In fact, this image was, used to refer to Jews. Historically, Jewish women were burnt as witches. The cast of the 1993 film by Disney called Hocus Pocus is a film in which some teenagers accidentally free a coven of witches in Salem, Massachusetts, a town most people associate with witch burnings. This cast is mostly of Jewish descent. Historically, Jews were lumped into the same category as pagans and met similar fates. Dressing as a witch for Halloween carries deep racial and ethical implications. According to Black Magic, Witchcraft, Race, and Resistance in Colonial New England by Timothy J. McMillan of Humboldt State University, the fact that witchcraft in the New World was commonly attributed to pagan beliefs and African spiritual practices is made interesting by the fact that the overwhelming majority of people accused and punished for witchcraft were white and female. This suggests that witchcraft was seen as relatively benign superstition when practiced by those of races deemed inferior, but quickly became threatening when it began infiltrating Caucasian society, specifically by those whose society at the time considered more easily corruptible: women. Dressing as a witch has deep gender-based, ethnic, and political implications. 3. Zombies. The English word zombie was first recorded in 1819 in a history of Brazil by the poet Robert Southey in the form of zombie. The Oxford English Dictionary gives the word's origins as West African and compares it to the Congo words nzambi, which means God, and zumbi, or nzumbi, which means fetish, but in this case fetish represents a figure, not a particular sexual proclivity. Some authors also compare it to the Congo word vumbi, or also pronounced mvumbi, which is a ghost, a revenant, or a corpse that still retains the soul. Or mvumbi, which is a body without a soul. And a kimbundu, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, my apologies, but it is a Bantu language spoken in the Portugal. And this, in a Kimbundu to Portuguese dictionary from 1903, the word nzumbi is defined as soul, while a later Kimbundu Portuguese dictionary defines it as being a spirit that is supposed to wander the earth to torment the living. One of the first books to expose Western culture to the concept of the voodoo zombie was W.B. Seabrook's The Magic Island, written in 1928. The account of a narrator who encountered voodoo cults in Haiti and their resurrected thralls. The story dramatized and caricaturized the religious practice of Haitians in order to play upon the contemporary fear of racial ambiguity. This makes sense given that Haiti is the only country in the world that arose out of a successful slave revolt. Even today in Haiti, Racial ambiguity is controversial and important topic. Most people who are lighter skinned or act white, in quotation marks, of course, are often perceived to be of a higher class than those with darker skin or who do not adapt to the customs of the majority. The fear of racial ambiguity or racial uncertainty was played on by the fact that African slaves who converted to Christianity in South American countries such as Brazil and Haiti often depicted female saints, such as Mother Mary, specifically in church carvings as pregnant and or black, implying that they might be pregnant with African babies, suggesting that black people were human too, and deserved to be treated as children of God, like everyone else. Or raise the question, who is the father? Or point to the fact that she too is or was an unwed mother, as were so many of the women who worked as slaves, and not uncommonly forced to bear children to produce more slaves, sometimes by a white father, who would of course deny this child his sirehood in order to maintain more slaves. This racial ambiguity was a fear that shackled the lives of many slaves because it would determine the course of their life as either a slave or a free man. This seemingly benign artistic depiction of pregnant Mother Mary was a silent protest that illustrates the deep fear of racial ambiguity depicted in stories of zombies. Zombies represent the question, to which world do I belong? And dressing as one has deep racial and ethical implications. 4. Vampires. The origin of vampires is manifold and comes from many different histories. Obviously, Bram Stoker's Dracula represents a perception of an aristocratic figure who drains those within reach of everything, including their blood, has deep classist political meanings, but as a Romanian, I will say that the story of Dracula has shaped the perception of my home country, Romania. Dracula, or Vlad Tepes, has nothing to do with the history of Dracula. Bram Stoker's story chose this name off of the alleged barbarity committed by Vlad Tepes, often referred to as Vlad the Impaler, whose nickname Dracula meant the dragon, or the serpent, or the devil. I once saw a sweepstakes promising a stay at Bran Castle in Romania in a coffin with chicken paprikash for dinner, a Hungarian dish that was eaten by the protagonist of the story. It struck me to see that the appeal of visiting my country, at its zenith, is represented in fetishizing this English author's story. The depiction of Dracula, even in cartoons or costumes, which is often shown with a Romanian or Slavic accent, unjustly warps the perception of Romania and hides the true beauty that is my beloved country. Romania has nothing to do with Dracula. Dressing as Dracula-esque vampires is essentially like a form of blackface that actively changes the perception of Romania and its culture with little historical precedent to account for it. The Striga is an Albanian folk monster representing a woman, a witch, who drains the blood of victims and disappears in the form of an insect, usually a moth or a bee. She is the only person who can cure her victims after draining them. Striga were frequently depicted as elderly, disfigured women, again playing upon the notion that women are somehow more easily corrupted by the power of dark forces, a theme which is reflected through countless religious and historical accounts across the world, spanning countless ages, for example the story of Adam and Eve, and frequently, as with the depiction of witches, depict a woman who is otherwise seen by society as undesirable. A woman without her youth and beauty has been by most of society, for most of history, been seen as almost an evil entity, almost as evil as a beautiful man. You may also find similar witch-like entities or vampires, with various other names, with similar etymologies, such as the Greek strix or Romanian strigoi, which also suggest and hinted towards any nocturnal, usually feminine, usually depicted as an elderly woman, usually a flying creature that craved the flesh of man and babies. The image of a stereotypical spinster comes to mind, an elderly, bitter woman who has not had love nor children, though has always longed for these things. Oh, if only. Poor thing. 5. Werewolves. One of the earliest depictions of what might be a man turning into a wolf was a story by the Greek philosopher Pausanias. I hope I am pronouncing that correctly, my apologies. In the 2nd century BC, who told the story of a man who ate the entrails of a child sacrificed to Zeus. This person, as punishment, would be turned into a wolf and only become human again if he abstained from eating human flesh for 9 years as a wolf. A more contemporary depiction, Marie de France's poem Bisclavret. My apologies if I pronounced it incorrectly. It was written in 1200 AD, and is another example in which the eponymous nobleman Bisclavret, for reasons not described, had to transform into a wolf every week. When his treacherous wife stole his clothing, he needed to restore his human condition again, he escaped the king's wolf hunt by imploring the king for mercy and accompanied the king thereafter as his pet or servant or companion. His behavior at the king's court was gentle, until his wife and her new husband appeared at court, so much so that his hateful attack on the couple was deemed justly motivated. These depictions of werewolves depict a person who turns wholly into a wolf and wholly back into a man. Later, these depictions will focus around the witchcraft panic present at the time. And like punishing women for being corrupted by the forces of evil, these whole wolf depictions of werewolves carry with them themes of betraying society and how one's subservience to authority might redeem themselves somehow in the eyes of the powerful. But most depictions of werewolves today imply something that is half man and half wolf, or a man with wolf-like features. And this is different from the examples we've just visited. This wolf man splits off. The Slavic werewolf, or velkolak, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, which becomes associated with the concept of revenant or vampire as well, is found in the folklore of Central and Eastern Europe, including Hungary, Romania, and the Balkans, while the Western werewolf sorcerer, as we've discussed, is found in France, German-speaking Europe, and in the Baltic. After 1650 AD, belief in lycanthropy had mostly disappeared from Europe, as evidenced in Diderot's Encyclopedia, which attributed reports of lycanthropy to some kind of disorder of the brain, although there were continuing reports of extraordinary, wolf-like beasts, but they were not considered werewolves, as we have discussed. One such report concerned the beast of Gevaudan, my apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly, which terrorized the general area of the former province of Gevaudan, now called Lozère, in south-central France from the years 1764 to 1767. This beast allegedly killed upwards of 80 men, women, and children. The part of Europe which showed more vigorous interest in werewolves after 1650 was the Holy Roman Empire. At least 9 works on lycanthropy were printed in Germany between 1649 and 1679. In the Austrian and Bavarian Alps, belief in werewolves persisted well into the 18th century. In any case, as late as in 1853 in Galicia, northwestern Spain, Manuel Blanco Romasanta was judged and condemned as the author of a number of murders, but he claimed to not be guilty because of his condition of lobisomne, or werewolf. Some modern researchers have tried to explain the reports of werewolf behavior with recognized medical conditions. Dr. Lee Illis of Guy's Hospital in London wrote a paper in 1963 entitled On Paraphernalia and the Etiology of Werewolves, in which he argues that historical accounts on werewolves could have in fact been referring to the victims of congenital paraphernalia, stating how the symptoms of photosensitivity, reddish teeth, and psychosis could have been grounds for accusing a sufferer of being a werewolf. One can argue against this, however, because mythological werewolves were almost invariably portrayed as resembling true wolves, and that their human forms were rarely physically conspicuous as porphyria, victims. Others have pointed out the possibility of historical werewolves having been sufferers of hypertrichosis, a hereditary condition manifesting itself in excessive hair growth. However, this can be dismissed, as the rarity of the disease ruled it out from happening on a large scale, as werewolf cases were in medieval Europe. People suffering from Down syndrome have been suggested by some scholars to have been possible originators of werewolf myths. Rabies also has been suggested as an origin of werewolf beliefs, because there are remarkable similarities between the symptoms of that disease and those of the legends, such as, for example, the fact that being bitten by a werewolf could result in the victim turning into one, which suggests the idea of a transmittable disease like rabies. However, the idea that lycanthropy could be transmitted in this way is not part of the original myths, and is largely delegated only to contemporary, as in very modern, accounts of lycanthropy. Lycanthropy can also be met with as the main content of a delusion. For example, the case of a woman has been reported who during episodes of acute psychosis complained of becoming 4 different species of animals. This theme of associating werewolves with illness and disability extends into modern-day literature. In an interview, J.K. Rowling of Harry Potter's book discusses the identity of Lupin, a werewolf, in her third book. J.K. Rowling says, "Professor Lupin, who appears in the third book, is one of my favorite characters. He's a damaged person, literally and metaphorically. I think it's important for children to know that adults, too, have their problems, that they struggle. His being a werewolf is a metaphor for people's reactions to illness and disability." Elsewhere, J.K. Rowling stipulates AIDS as the meaning in a 2008 publication or interview, I forget which, where Lupin operates as the HIV metaphor. It was someone who had been infected young, who suffered stigma, who had a fear of infecting others, who was terrified he would pass on his condition to his son, and it was a way of examining prejudice, unwarranted prejudice, towards a group of people, and examining why people might become embittered when they're treated that unfairly. Published in 2009, Jata is the work of an Australian author, Jenny Hale. Jata tells the story of a princess named Jata, who becomes a werewolf once a month, on a full moon, and becomes hairy after puberty. This parallel with femininity and menstruation may be incidental, but is explained as an affliction or illness. Hale said, "I wanted to write a story about a princess with a disability, something that made her unpopular, something she had absolutely no control over. The affliction that Jata endures aroused my sympathy, even if most strangers would find them horrific and dangerous." There are other contemporary accounts, also likewise linking werewolves, who have historically been associated with illness with various minority groups. This shows that dressing like a werewolf for Halloween has ableist, racial, and gender-based implications. One is essentially dressing as a person with some kind of affliction, or belonging to another group that has frequently been associated with disease or inferiority. I will make another video at some point describing how races and femininity have been associated with diseased states, historically. 6. Skeletons and skeleton-type costumes. I had read once, a long time ago, that dressing up as a skeleton was a way to mock starving French immigrants in the Americas. If you can provide me with any links relating to this, I'd appreciate it. I'm having great difficulty finding it. Skeletons are scary and spooky because they remind us of our inevitable demise. This might make them much more appealing for certain age groups than for others. Notice, then, that when people are depicted wearing skulls, it is often young people doing so. This makes sense considering that the elderly, or aging people in general, don't even enjoy discussing or revealing their age, for its many implications of disability. Wearing or showing skulls or skeleton reminds everyone, including these people as well as those who may be terminally ill, of their impending potential to suffer, become disabled, and meet their end. A female skeleton is usually depicted as smoother than a male's. A male skeleton is usually thicker, rougher, and appears bumpier. This is due to the fact that males have larger muscles and therefore their skeletons require stronger attachment sites. The male skeleton is heavier and possesses a narrow pelvic cavity, broader shoulders, and long rib cage. On the other hand, the female skeleton is less heavy and possesses a wider pelvic cavity, narrow shoulders, and a shorter rib cage. A male's supraorbital ridge juts forward visibly, while a female's is smooth. Males' eye sockets tend to be squarer, while women's are rounder, with sharp edges in the corner. Males' jaws are square, while females tend to be pointed. I have seen, without exception, no feminine skeletons in fashion, or media, or costumes. The spooky skeleton we are accustomed to, which is depicted in Halloween events and fashion, is invariably a male skeleton. Notice also how frequently violence is pitted against men in media, in comparison to any other groups. The presentation of male skeletons, specifically male skeletons, creates an atmosphere that affects certain genders and age groups differently on a psychological level. Wearing skeletons, costumes, decorations, and other skeleton-themed things has deep ageist and sexist implications. 7. Historical figures, warriors, and serial killers. I wonder if there is any nation on earth that has not ever committed any atrocities or genocide. It goes without saying that dressing up as members of these groups portrays a caricaturized ethnic representation similar to blackface, but it also suggests that these actions are acceptable or fun. It legitimizes institutions of oppression and bigotry. If dressing up as a serial killer is acceptable, but dressing up as a racist is not, it suggests murder is more acceptable than racism. This is a point I would leave to others to debate, but are you ready to stand by that claim and accept it wholeheartedly? The depiction of serial killers and murderers almost always depict males as the murderer, and create a sexist caricature of male aggressiveness that shapes the way men are criminalized and women are victimized. 8. Sexy costumes. There is a running joke that Halloween is just an excuse for women to wear provocative clothing, but these sexy costumes are almost always sexualized versions of men's costumes. Men are rarely, if ever, shown to wear sexualized costumes. If men wear sexualized costumes, it is almost always ironic or comedic. In the few instances where men wear sexy outfits, it largely seeks to target a male audience and carries nuances of homoeroticism. Women dressing in sexualized costumes suggest that they are sexual objects to be desired. And yet combining this with the fact that almost all the serial killers depicted are male creates a startling realization at the effect fiction may have on society. Considering that most serial killers in real life and in film are depicted as targeting women, society considers conventionally attractive. What is female attractiveness in society? Many feminists have argued in the past that all the things which make men attractive are things that suggest competence, industry, aggression, and dominance. Many feminists also argue that those things which make women attractive are things which suggest incompetence, helplessness, vulnerability, and stupidity. This presentation in contemporary society is shown by the fact that women wear heels that limit their ability to walk and make them appear wounded. Women also wear tight clothing that restricts their movements but also outlines the shape of their bodies. Anyone who's worn both men's and women's skinny jeans will tell you that women's pants have a crotch that deliberately goes up into the buttocks to outline the cheeks of their posterior, while men's skinny jeans do the exact opposite and try to create a sag so as to flee from suggesting sexual availability or desirability. Since masculinity in our society is expected to be the active actor of desire and women are expected to be the passive objects. Feminism also argues that maleness in society is anything that pushes away from a natural state of femininity. And this is why women will frequently copy men's fashion, but men will disregard said fashion once it becomes associated with femininity. It is considered bold, brave, playful, and daring for women to do or wear something masculine, but the opposite represents for most of society, subconsciously, a fall from grace. I have at times been fired for wearing makeup, when women were permitted to. I have been asked to leave gyms for wearing yoga pants, when women were wearing the same yoga pants. I have been asked to leave class and put on something more appropriate when wearing short shorts or pants that clung tightly to my body. It is considered offensive for a man to demonstrate sexuality or sexual desirability or any of the things we've discussed society sees as making a woman desirable. To be desired as a man is seen by society as an insult, but to be seen as a man, as a woman, is considered a profound honor in our modern world. Consider the fact that women can wear pants, but men cannot wear skirts. These sexualized costumes often seek to present these caricatures of female attractiveness we've discussed and assert that these often insulting traits are part of what actually makes women attractive and what makes them the perfect victim. They playfully suggest that women are lesser than men and that they are less competent, while men's costumes and the costumes of serial killers frequently glorify male aggression, that same aggression that historically has targeted women in the streets of London. As evidence, consider this costume of a female cop and compare it to this costume of a male cop. Does the former seem competent, or reliable, or protective? Surely these both are a gag, but it is interesting to see how feminine instantly correlates with incompetence and sexual desirability while simultaneously conflating them as the same. Halloween has become removed from its religious roots and essentially became a day where anyone can dress up as anything and go trick-or-treating. If dressing as something is unacceptable, we must also bring into question that which we currently believe to be acceptable. By saying certain things are acceptable in fiction and other things are not, what are we really saying? What does it say about us if the moment we are allowed to be whatever we want for a night, we choose these things? Please feel free to dress as whatever you please. My intention was only to perform this thought experiment for your entertainment and to generate some conversation. Thank you for watching my video. I would really appreciate it if you could share your comments, your thoughts, your questions. I do read all my comments, and I actually produced this video as a request of various other viewers like you. I love criticism so that I can know what I can do better, what I can improve upon. These videos are a very fun hobby of mine, so I hope that you will let me know what you think. I appreciate any opinions, no matter if you agree, disagree. I love reading it all. Be blessed, be safe. Love you all.